This is the most complicated Nen ability in all of Hunter x Hunter. So I asked all of you in a community post which abilities you had trouble understanding, and the most overwhelmingly requested was Parallel Future, belonging to 4th Prince Zetsu, which to put into some perspective is a Nen ability so complicated that Togashi had to draw a full-on textbook flowchart diagram to even begin to convey it logically. But don't let all of those lines and numbers intimidate you, or even worse, bore you, because this is one of my absolute favorite abilities in the series. It's a beautiful gem of incredible power achieved with wildly high risk restrictions. But one thing that complicates things right off the bat is that Zetsu is a specialist, meaning that most of the traditional rules of Nen do not apply to his abilities and very much operate within their own unique set of laws. Another factor that often initially confuses people is that due to Zetsu being a Succession War contestant, he is granted a Guardian Spirit Beast as part of the rules. However, right now he actually has 2 Nen Beasts and they tend to get a little bit confused with each other. This Nen Beast here, the horse thing with the woman face, is the actual Guardian Spirit Beast conjured from the Seed Urn. It has its own autonomy and its own separate but not entirely unrelated Nen ability. Regardless, forget about the horse for now. We will talk about and explain it, but for the purpose of Parallel Future, let's just pretend it doesn't exist for now. The beast we're more interested in is the second one, which I'm going to describe as having a head shaped like a giant sperm. This is not a Guardian Spirit Beast. This is a regular old Nen Beast, which was conjured by Zetsu's raw aura and raw desire. It was conjured unconsciously as well. In fact, Zetsu has no awareness of either of his Nen Beasts. But this second, jizzier one is almost certainly the one responsible for Parallel Future. But before we really get into that, we need to address some basics. Because Parallel Future is a 3-step ability, the first of which is that Zetsu needs to enter a state of Zetsu. And this is one of the 4 basic principles of Nen, specifically the suppression of aura, which is often used to conceal your own presence from other Nen users. Because wandering around town with all of your aura leaking everywhere, it's kind of like wandering around with your pants unzipped. Everyone can see your exposed aura. My god, you indecent human Nen user. But not only that, they can also see just how large your aura is, if you get what I mean. Very embarrassing if you have, say, a micro aura. So achieving Zetsu is the equivalent of zipping up those jeans and hiding your true power from the world. However, it comes at the cost of leaving the Zetsu user extremely vulnerable, because you are completely defenseless against any kind of Nen attack, or in fact, just any kind of attack. In fact, it's even worse than that because it also leaves you vulnerable to accidental Nen exposure. We saw this in action when Gon and Killua got to the 200th floor of Heaven's Arena and were frozen in fear after being exposed to Hisoka's hostile Ren. Or much more profoundly during the Chimera Ant arc when Nov was exposed to the potent N of a Royal Guard, which triggered a complete mental breakdown. Encountering that kind of aura whilst in a state of Zetsu was said to be the equivalent of walking around naked in a blizzard. And I go to the extremes to define Zetsu because you really need to know just how much of a risk Zetsu is taking by engaging in this ability. The 4th Prince is left completely exposed, physically and mentally defenseless. So that's a pretty extreme price to pay. And what ability could possibly be worth that cost? Well, that takes us to step 2, which is that Zetsu needs to close his eyes. This is by far the most simple step, and enjoy it because it gets a lot more complicated from here. Step 3 is that whilst in this state, Zetsu receives a vision of 10 seconds into the future, which Zetsu refers to as the ephemeral 10 seconds. It's a very special 10 seconds, Zetsu is quite fond of them, and it's important to note that while these 10 seconds are passing, no time is actually passing in reality. All of this just happens instantly to anyone who isn't Zetsu. This isn't a new concept to Hunter x Hunter, and the most infamous figure capable of manipulating time perception was Neferpitou, who was said to infinitely compress their awareness and essentially stop the internal sensation of time when they were confronted with Isaac Netero. Zetsu could be achieving something similar, stopping the internal sensation of time but adding his own vision on top. Although it could also be something completely different to do with all sorts of wibbly wobbly timey-wimey stuff. But this knowledge is exceptionally powerful because it gives Zetsu the ability to change those future events. A basic example would be one time where he foresaw himself breaking Zetsu after hearing a big old crash. So instead, he decided to change that future by maintaining his Zetsu and anticipating the crash. However, the stakes immediately get much higher because Zetsu also foresaw his own death via a bullet in the head administered by Theta, his bodyguard and Nen teacher. And so Zetsu broke out of the vision to dodge the bullet and prevent said death, which brings up an absolutely fascinating interaction, because the name of this ability is currently Parallel Future, implying that things are playing out in tandem, which is where the mind-boggling truly begins. Because when Zetsu opens his eyes, this is when the true effect of the ability begins. creating two separate realities playing out side by side each other for 10 seconds. And after that 10 seconds, they then converge back into one. Which is where the mind-boggling truly begins. Because when Sridnik opens his eyes, this is when the true effect of the ability begins. Creating two separate realities playing out side by side with each other for 10 seconds. And after that 10 seconds, they then converge back into one. So reality 1 is what Sridnik himself sees in the vision. Even if Sridnik does change his future, those around him are still going to see the original future, which is presented to them in what may be some form of illusion. Meanwhile, reality 2 is the one exclusive to Sridnik, where he can enact whatever changes he so desires. So to use the gunshot as an example, what Theta saw in reality 1 was herself shooting and killing Sridnik. However, after that 10 seconds was up, Sridnik seemingly magically appeared behind her. Because what happened in reality 2 is that Sridnik dodged the bullet and maneuvered himself behind Theta. Then realities 1 and 2 converged, thus leaving Theta completely and utterly mentally screwed. It's actually kind of funny because when this happens in the manga, Theta experiences the dead Sridnik illusion, but at the same time she also gets hit by Melody's illusion. So Theta's just like, I have no idea what the crap just happened there. And I wish I could say that this is the end of Parallel Future, but there's more. Because the 10-second future sight is not actually limited to 10 seconds. The ability doesn't automatically stop after that. It stops theoretically whenever Sridnik himself wants it to stop. However, engaging for more than 10 seconds comes at a cost, as after Sridnik is granted the ephemeral 10 seconds, he can keep looking into the future, however time then starts moving again in reality. So for example, if Sridnik chose to view 11 seconds into the future, then 1 second would pass in reality. And if he chooses to view 12 seconds into the future, then that's 2 seconds, and so on and so forth. You know how to count. And theoretically, he can do this for as long as he wants, so long as he maintains Zetsu. So long as he leaves himself vulnerable. To put this into maybe easier terms, let's say that you're watching the same movie on 2 TVs, however one TV is 10 seconds ahead of the other at all times. Except that movie is your life, and you can turn the future TV off at any time to alter events as you see fit. But there is still one more complicating factor. Because you may have noticed this from the images, but the vision Sridnik receives does not come from his own first-person perspective. And in a rather trippy twist, he views the parallel future from the third-person perspective. And this is where our big jizzy Nen beast comes back into things. It's currently theorized that parallel future is actually the ability of this Nen beast, since Sridnik's vision perspective matches up with the actual placement of the Nen beast in question. But questions, yes, it brings up so many questions. Like here's a big one. How can this Nen beast even exist if Sridnik is using Zetsu? To clarify, Zetsu means that you are cutting off your aura and leaving it contained within your fleshy vessel. As a result of this, anything that you've been powering with your aura would deactivate, which is very much the case with Sridnik's guardian spirit beast. The funky, horsey creature vanishes from existence when Sridnik enters Zetsu because it no longer has a fuel source to live. Meanwhile, this second Nen beast appears to operate on an unprecedented level of aura usage. Although to be fair, the exact same problem applies to Sridnik himself. How is he using a Nen ability without access to his aura? But outside of basic conjuration, to my knowledge, this is the only Nen ability that can be used in a state of Zetsu. So even if you do perfectly understand all of the time and reality mechanics, it still kind of makes no sense from the Nen perspective. Speaking of, though, it's relevant to note that Sridnik, despite being a Nen genius, is still an amateur when it comes to actually using Zetsu. He currently can't activate it instantly, which is pretty wild, because it means that once he has mastered like the second or third basic thing that everyone learns about Nen, then he will be able to look almost instantaneously into the future anytime he wants. Now, there are some unknown factors with the ability. Sridnik himself still doesn't quite know exactly how it works, and one great unknown is whether or not this vision allows Sridnik to see aura. Thus far, it's only been applied to situations with real people and real constructs, and the true test of parallel future will be whether or not it allows Sridnik to see how other people are going to use their Nen abilities against him, which is a tricky conversation because Sridnik still has to master the basic principles like your Zetsus. He hasn't even touched any of the intermediate ones like Gyo, meaning that he theoretically shouldn't be able to see any abilities that are concealed within, like say Kurapika's chains for example. However, there's also an argument to be made that vision is based on the restrictions of the beast itself rather than Sridnik's own personal skills, which brings up a whole lot of other potential unknown factors. As promised though, to touch on the guardian spirit beast, this is a completely separate entity. Sridnik is neither invoking control of nor sharing in its abilities. However, it does rather scarily take after him. This beast has an ability that triggers when a very specific type of person lies to the fourth prince, because to quote the man himself, "What I hate the most is a lying wench." So look, you have to meet the lying wench condition first, pretty standard Nen stuff. But what happens after that is a terrifying 3-strike system. The first time a lying wench lies to Saradnik, they are scratched with the barbed tongue of the horsey beast, and at this point there's no greater damage or effect. It really is more of a precursor, indicating that the ability itself has begun. And in the series, Theta's first lie was when Saradnik asked if he could trust her, to which Theta said, "Yes, of course, I Theta would never do anything to harm you." And the Nen beast said, detecting her lie immediately and scratching their face. And things escalate rather quickly and quite horrifically from here. The second lie was Theta claiming that the gun shot was part of Saradnik's training, and not at all some sort of kill-murder attempt. But look, even Saradnik knew that this was a lie, so the Nen beast picking up on it was to be expected. And this time the horsey beast brought Theta to her knees and sent her unconscious with the very ominous warning of, "If you answer the prince's next question with a lie, you will no longer be human." Theta then had a bit of a trippy dream where Saradnik's head appeared on the Nen beast asking if he could trust her, calling back to the first lie. And then when Theta woke up, a whole ton of her face was marked with either a scar or some sort of lying wench infection. Doesn't matter what it is, because what it is not good. And there was a lot of confusion as to why the Nen beast was giving Theta so many chances, with it currently being hypothesized by the characters that a third and final lie will result in a fate worse than death, with Theta being engulfed into potentially an Nen beast herself to become one of Saradnik's pawns, which is very much in keeping with the personality of the fourth prince. He doesn't dispose of his wenches. Instead, he turns them into all sorts of grotesque art pieces. So of course the beast would have a similar and equally as horrifying effect. And while this is separate from Parallel Future, they do work quite well as a set, with Parallel Future providing Saradnik with the truth of the world around him, and so long as he applies the ability intelligently and safely, he cannot be fooled or taken by surprise, and it would be extraordinarily difficult to outplay him. Meanwhile, his guardian spirit beast provides him with the truth of people. You cannot hide your true intentions from him, and if you try to, it only goes on to make Saradnik stronger. It's a very troublesome set of abilities, to say the least. Saradnik is approaching, dare I say, an increasing threat of flat-out omniscience, and with one of, if not the most complicated Nen ability in the series, this is going to push even a character like Kurapika to his very limits.